My name is HansDodererA, and I teach high school at Painesville High School. I teach 7th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and senior ecology class. This particular project was for 7th grade and sophomores. And so the goal of the project was to get students in the process of making solid claims based on data. So one of the projects that I wanted to begin this year was to build a raised flower bed to transplant our rose cuttings. And so we ordered some auxin it's called Endo-3 butyric acid, and I substituted it for the acetic acid because I got to reading some literature, and the success rates with beginners is best with the over-the-counter rooting hormone that you can get at Walmart and you can order easily off the internet. So what our students do is they use this rooting hormone, and they made some cuttings back in the fall of some roses that we have on campus. They're called knockout roses, and they made these cuttings and they treated them with different concentrations of the rooting hormone and different segments of our bed that you can see here in these photos. And then they monitored the growth over a period of about 3-4 months. And the students, when they planted these in different sections, they later on came out and they ascertained the survival rates. And the students learned that the concentrations of 0.1% of the auxin gave the best survival rates of 95.5%. The control group was the group that did not receive the treatment. And what was a little bit misleading is you would figure the more concentrated the rooting hormone that you used, the better survival rates that you would get. But in fact, this was not the case. What we did find out, though, is that there was an optimum concentration that did work best, and it was that of 0.1% Endo-3 butyric acid. So the students looked at the control group, analyzed their data, and prepared the charts and the data tables that you see up here. Now, as a teacher, using this idea of cuttings was ideal for teaching students about cell specialization and cell differentiation. Gave the chance to review the concept of asexual reproduction. Now remember, you're working with 7th graders here. So the basic anatomy of the stem, the woody stem, we'd already covered some of the conducting tissues, xylem and phloem. So this was a chance to learn more about plants. So you introduced this to teach kids about plants, to review concepts of mitosis and meiosis, and then let them see in a hands-on way that not everything that's reproduced on Earth is going to come as a product of an egg and a sperm that unite. Okay, so they get to see and understand the concept of asexual reproduction. They learn the external anatomy of the woody stem, and then they get to practice setting up an experiment with a control and then taking the information from the data and making a claim. So the claim that we came up with was that indeed, there is an advantage of using rooting hormones and the survival rates of the cuttings that you produced. And one other thing I want to mention is that we've got these cuttings in the fall of the year, and in the fall of the year, as you might know, a tree is going to dormancy. So what we were hoping is that the portion of the stem known as the swells, which would have became this year's stems, we kind of tricked them into becoming root cells instead of stem cells. So the kids got to learn a little bit more about cell differentiation and understand that all cells, mostly all cells in our bodies, have all the genetic makeup in them to become any kind of cell. But at one particular time, the genes are turned on or off to become a particular kind of cell, which then, once it's differentiated, is specialized. So getting the 7th grader to understand cell specialization and differentiation and asexual reproduction and some basic plant anatomy was the goal. And I met that goal this year. We did a pre-test and did a post-test to monitor improvement. I've not graded them, but we've taken the post-test yesterday. So from what I'm getting from my students, most everyone feels like they've done much, much better on the post-test. So I will be using that as my evidence that the project was worthwhile doing and the learning of the monitoring the kids' learning. So that was pretty much it. I do want to give a little credit for the Big Sandy community college, I was able to get an ex-student who was in a carpentry class to come up and help us build the raised flower bed. It was a little over 30 feet long and about 4.5 feet wide. And there was a lot of soil that we had to move into this area. It's an enclosed area that's in behind our school. If you know anything about Painesville High School, it's kind of a city school, and you're in the city, so you don't have a lot of space. But we found a little niche, you might say, and we've got a small greenhouse. Now, to sum this up and think about what we'd do next year better, as a teacher, I would dictate which students we're going to plant in which rows, because later on when we had to go back and do a count, some of them were not certain exactly where they placed their cuttings. Although we had an area, we knew we were going to plant certain concentrations of the stems that were treated with the hormone. We didn't know exactly which student planted which cutting. So next year, I would have students assigned to certain rows, like you're in row 1, and you're going to plant 5 cuttings in this row 1, and the next student's going to be row 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. And one other thing I thought I might do to improve the results, so that when it came down to the time you're trying to ascertain the data and make conclusions, is that it would have been a little easier for the students to do the math if there would have been a set even number of cuttings in each of the sections that we had, each of the experimental sections that we had. So section A perhaps would be like 0.10%, section B would be 0.80%, section C could be the control, or it could be the 1.8%. I kind of cheated a little bit and did one of my own using another rooting hormone that I initially thought I was going to use with the students, and that was the endo-3 acetic acid. And it works pretty well, but I'd done my research earlier and found that it breaks down faster. And so I was concerned that it might not be good for the first time around with the students, but to use something that's more commonly used. So the endo-3 butyric acid was what I went with. But the cuttings that I produced, I did it later in the year. We're talking late February, early March, and I was able to get them to survive. So I wanted to test this myself to see if there was other times that we could make cuttings, and then use that as another investigation in the future, is that what time of the year is best to get the best survival rates. Do you have to do it in the fall, or can you do it in the spring? Can you do it in the summer? And of course, if you do the research, you'll find that late fall, early spring is probably best, because a lot of the cells in the meristematic regions of the buds of plants and the roots, they've already matured and they're ready to start growing whatever cell they've decided to become. So you want to get these cells when they're in a state of, a state like they're not hibernating, but what's called dormancy. So if you can get that plant right at the right time, you can induce and you can trick those plants into growing roots instead of stems. So overall, it was a really good project. The kids worked hard. Now, the last thing we'll do with these, and as you can see, we've taken one out to examine, and the kids got to look at the root development and stuff like that and learn about the different types of roots as well. But in the next few weeks, these students will be potting their own roses, and we've planted plenty enough, and we've had plenty of survival rates that each one of the students will pot their rose and then take it home for Mother's Day. And that's how we're going to finish up this project. That's all I have to say for now. If you have any questions, I'll field those at this time. Okay, so you can all do this. It just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of care, and you can really root roses easily. They're not too hard to root. And one of the things that the students, we want to say, the cost effect of rooting hormones, using rooting hormones, it's kind of expensive in a sense. Not over expensive, but if you were looking at mass production, if you're a big greenhouse company and you produce millions of plants a year, well, if you can get a rooting hormone that's going to give you a 15% gain on your productivity, then it's going to be worth the money to do this. But for the everyday person, you can go out without a rooting hormone, because what the fact is, these cuttings, when you wound a plant and you cut it, it has its own natural auxins as well. and they can do very well if the conditions are right. And you can get pretty good survival rates without any, hormones at all. But taking it to a higher level, if you're a company and you want to mass produce roses because you don't want to wait 3, 4, 5 years for them to grow from another, fruiting body or something, you're going to make a lot more money by investing and using these rooting hormones. Now, there's all kinds of other factors that go into play: the type of soil, sandy soil versus loamy soil versus clay soil. I mean, this project lends itself to a lot of other investigations. But that being said, I'm finished, and thank you for your time.